Hello, it's me, Seb, and it's time once again for the Midyear Book Freakout tag. I'm coming to you from a part of Canada where it is swelteringly hot. So I've got a fan going on in the background and hopefully that humming doesn't intrude too much in the video. And I'm going to keep looking down in this direction because that's where my laptop is with the questions on it. So question number one, best books you've read so far in 2024. I've got some of them here for once. This is Delicious in Dungeon or Dungeon Meshi. I'm going to call it Dungeon Meshi by its Japanese name because that's what the fan base calls it, I found on the internet. And that just sounds much better and it's a better title, and I think I've talked about it in previous videos. Anyway, this is a fantasy manga which will be the answer to almost every question in this tag. Next we have The Age of Anxiety by W.H. Auden. This is, in terms of plot, about four characters who meet in a bar in America during World War II. They get acquainted, they get drunk, and they go on this weird hallucinatory trip together. So basically a good night out. But in terms of form, and kind of that's more what it really is, it's a modernist narrative written in only in poetry, but broken up into scenes with kind of scene directions, as though it's a play. And it's kind of the only modern era thing I've ever read which feels like kind of Shakespeare-y. Who Killed Palomino Molero by Mario Vargas Llosa, a Peruvian detective novel set in the 1950s, but I think kind of maybe written in the 80s. Truckers by Terry Pratchett, which is a middle grade, I think, fantasy about a society of gnomes living in a department store. And Territory of Light by Yuko Tsushima, which is more of a last year book for me. Like, I feel I read most of it last year, but I technically finished it this year, so I guess technically it's on this list. Question number two, best sequel you've read so far in 2024. So that's definitely Dungeon Meshi again. I've read 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a bit of 5. Here what I'm holding is 4, 5, 6, and 7 because I've already returned the earlier ones to the library. These are all library books. The first 4 books and kind of the beginning of the 5th one are all the first arc of the storyline, which means that I guess like if it was a series of novels rather than manga, that would have been book 1. So I feel kind of like I've read book 1, but since they're manga, I count them as sequels, and they just keep getting better and better as they go. And I think it's kind of how Kui, the writer, sets up expectations. So basically the premise is that we have a group of adventurers, a human, an elf, a dwarf, and a half-foot, which is basically a non-copyrighted version of a hobbit. So all very familiar territory, even for a fantasy Philistine like me. They're going into a dungeon, and what they're trying to do basically is rescue a damsel in distress from a dragon, you know? Like, it's not on the absolute surface, it's not mind-blowing stuff, and that's really intentional because it's meant to feel familiar. Everything is signaling that this is not like a serious fantasy epic. You can just relax here and just chill out with these characters, which is great. The gimmick is that they have to eat monsters in the dungeon to survive because they're poor, basically. And originally it was serialized in a manga, so every serialized section had like a kind of monster of the week, like what are they gonna confront and end up eating this time, and it always ends in them cooking whatever they've encountered, although sometimes they cook things that they've encountered in previous episodes, and then they eat it, and then often they kind of come together over the meal in some way, shape, or form. This is very low stakes from the start, especially that they're all like experienced adventurers, and they're in a dungeon where you go from the upper levels and down into the lower levels, and the upper levels are kind of the easiest ones. So there's no real sense of danger because they can just basically handle whatever comes their way. The interest is in the food. But then the sneaky thing is that as you go on in the series, the characters are so well drawn and the developments of their relationships with each other are so organic and involving that you really start to care for them, or at least I do. And that gimmicky trope about eating monsters turns out to be part of a larger overarching theme about coexistence, whether it's coexistence with other people or coexistence with animals or coexistence with just this dungeon and life in general. There's also these other little touches to like subtly raise the stakes as they go down into the dungeon. Like we learn more about who the damsel in distress actually is and what she means to the different characters. So while the comedy and having a good time is always at the forefront, in the background it's getting more intense. And like I said, the deeper they go into the dungeon, the less safe it is. So yeah, in terms of sequels, each volume has been more gripping than the last for me. Although, yeah, that said, all of them are 5-star reads. Question number 3, new release you haven't read yet but want to. The Dungeon Meshi series has already all been released, I think, so that doesn't count. But like, I don't, people who watch this channel will already know that for me, like, a new release is like anything that's come out in the 21st century, basically. That said, I never read that book by Mieko Kanai, Mild Vertigo, which came out last year. So I'm really looking forward to that when I get to it. And then also there's a book coming out this year called Silken Gazelles by Joka Alharthi. So Alharthi and Kanai are two of my all-time favorite writers, so obviously those are ones I'm really looking forward to. Question number 4, most anticipated release for the second half of the year. Yeah, that's the one I just mentioned, Silken Gazelles by Joka Alharthi. Question number 5, biggest disappointment. Okay, so The City and the City by China Mievo was a book that I'd been, looking forward to. It'd been on my list for ages, like a decade, I guess, like a really long time. And I finally read it. I read it on the audiobook, and it's like this detective story in a world where there's two cities that have kind of been converged, or like they've developed. It's never kind of sure if whether they were two that merged or one that split, but in any case there's two cities and they're occupying the same geographical space, and what that means is the different, like, inhabitants have to like ignore the people and the places that are not in their city, like officially in their city. So you can have, for example, a street which would be called a cross-hatched street, where like one side of the street is in one city and the other side is in the other, or even in some cases like a building where one part of the building or one shop is in one city and the other one is in the other. And there's all sorts of colors and codes and things, and like the language is different, things to let you know which is which, and that the citizens can easily navigate which they're in, so what to ignore and what not to ignore. And all sorts of interesting things come up from this, like postal service and stuff like that. Like sometimes if you want to post something into the other city, even if the house is like right next to it, it has to go to the international post office, cross the border, which is in the middle of the cities, and then come back to where it is, like basically to the next door house. So I really like that China Mievo put so much thought into world building, and that is what makes this novel good. But unfortunately, it's a detective novel. Like, when I started reading it, I didn't think it was unfortunate. I thought it was a great idea to set a detective novel in this place where the detectives have to navigate between the two cities, and like, is the murderer in this city, in that city? It's kind of like, yeah, it was quite a good idea, I thought, like as a concept, but in execution, I guess I just don't like detective novels, or at least this one seemed just like really bog standard, boring, predictable characters, the kind of setup which, while led you through the two different cities, it didn't really, I feel like, make the most of them in a way. We just, as the story goes through them, we get to learn about them, right? Through things like the post, which I found interesting, or like what happens if there's a fire, right? Like each city has a different fire department, but what if the fire is kind of crossing cities? How do they work together to put out the fire when it's illegal for them to acknowledge each other's existence, right? Things like that were just like fascinating, and also like how do they deal with other countries, their international relationships and stuff. Like all that was interesting, and a lot of that was in the novel, but the story that is the vehicle to teach us all these things was just like this really boring, bog standard detective story. Weirdly similar to the detective book, this one, which I mentioned, Who Killed Palomino Molero, which is a crime novel, and the actual crime detective part of it, and solving the crime and whodunit, and how the detectives are gonna, question this person and get through this like ordeal or whatever. That was really boring, actually. The main plot of this I thought was very predictable and boring, and there's nothing going for it. And the setting was also fantastic. It was so alive, and really you feel immersed in the kind of the heat and the desert and the poverty and the sort of, third worldness of Peru at that time. But the main difference between this book, which made it like one of my favorite books of the year, and City and the City, which made it one of my biggest disappointments, was that this is very short and the City and the City is massive. Like, it took ages to get through. So it became a real slog, right? Whereas this one managed to do what it needed to do. The plot is a vehicle to show me this world and immerse me in this world really well. And yeah, I guess it's not just the length. I guess in general, Mario Vargas Llosa did a better job of achieving his goals, I think, like as a literature project. And so I didn't need to enjoy the plot that much to get a lot out of this book. Whereas I felt there was so much in the City and the City, but a lot of it was just bloated pages and yeah, it was way too big. And then my other big disappointment was Attack on Titan, or Shingeki no Kyojin. I have the 2 and 3 here, which is a shame because number 1 has the best cover. But yeah, I read 1 and thought it was really good. I thought it was great, actually. I had such high hopes for it, although it ended on a kind of twist which made me really kind of nervous and doubtful about where it was going to go. And I won't say it in case people want to read it or whatever, but like, then my worst fears were confirmed in number 2. And then just in case it could pick things back up, I tried number 3, but it never recovered. So I'm going to stop reading the series. But the disappointment isn't just the big gap between 1 and 2. It's also because of like my background knowledge of this. Like, when I first went to Japan back in 2014, yeah, that was when this was at the height of its fame. And it was everywhere. The movie had just come out. The manga was in like every street shop. And yeah, like, I was just like, it was everywhere, but I never got around to reading it, even though I always planned to. And it's about giants. It's about these giants that appear one day in a sort of medieval version of Earth, I guess. And they eat everybody, and we only survive by building one big city, which has the last of humanity in it, with really tall walls. And so like, our technology develops differently. I don't think they develop guns, I don't think, but they develop different things based on their lack of resources, and also the need to try and survive against the giants, which are basically just better than us. They're just huge and unstoppable, and they eat humans. So there's nothing you can do, basically. And that sort of sense of dread is really caught in the drawings. They're just nightmarish. They look a bit like, what's he called, Goya? You know, Goya's Kronos, and he's eating the baby. They look kind of like that. Like, when they're eating humans, they don't look like evil, like ha ha ha. They don't speak, right? But they look kind of real. And when they're eating humans, their eyes are kind of like wide and staring off in different directions. And it's just really nightmarish and scary. And I really liked the atmosphere and the sort of the hopelessness and the helplessness. But then, yeah, things just took a turn, and it ends up being, in my opinion, just like, I don't know, the characters are actually good, it's annoying, the world is amazing, the world building is amazing, the giants are terrifying, and I love it when somebody takes lesser known or lesser used folkloric creatures and then just make them like really either scary or just engaging, you know what I mean? Just like kind of really gripping, really like, I'm so into gnomes now. I want someone to do that for mummies as well. That would be really great. So yeah, Attack on Titan, great giants, great characters actually, and just really, really terrible plotting, I think. And the weird thing is, I don't normally care so much about plot. Like I just said, right, for the Palomino story, right? Palomino Molero story. Like, the plot was really bad, but the story was so engaging and it was nice and short. But I guess for some reason in this one, the plot just is so important and it's such a main kind of driver of what you're reading that just the pictures and the characters being good wasn't enough, unfortunately. Number 6, biggest surprise, that is Dungeon Meshi, easily. My partner started watching the anime, I think because it just sounded really stupid and fun. One day they got to the sort of end of the first arc where there's a big twist, and they were really shocked, like visibly emotionally shocked. So then, to see what the big deal was, I decided to start watching, and soon it was like, oh, okay, I don't really know these characters, I don't really know what's going on. To get like the impact of all this, I have to go back to the beginning of the story and start experiencing it that way. I go in still not expecting anything really, and I allow myself to get vulnerable. I allow myself to get close. And here we are now. I'm reading the manga, I'm an obsessive fan, I want merchandise, I want a Dungeon Meshi t-shirt I can wear. I want to start like a separate YouTube channel so I can just discuss plot details and character points about just Dungeon Meshi. So yeah, I mean look at it. It's got a dwarf making stir-fried rice in a big wok being chased by a dragon down a corridor. It's ridiculous, but surprising. I was also surprised by Truckers, which was a reread for me. I'd read it when I was like very, very small and did not expect to like get that much out of it except for a nostalgia boost, like, oh yeah, when I was a kid I liked these gnomes, right? Little did I know it was absolutely amazing. I also read a book which I think was for very young children called Shiro Tokuro, or Black and White, and I thought I can read this, the Japanese is easy enough, but I actually thought it was really good. Like it's just like a black and white blob and they're kind of battling with each other, and the way that their emotions kind of shift really subtly through their eye movements and how they dominate the page was just like really engaging, and I thought that was great. And oh yeah, another big surprise, which was actually in a way, yeah, kind of a disappointment as well, but more surprise than disappointment, I guess, was that I read at the beginning of the year, I read Alcestis, the play by Euripides, which is a Greek myth retelling about a woman who gives up her life for her husband, and so she goes to the underworld, and then he's left with the kind of the guilt of having, you know, basically had his wife sacrifice herself for him when he was the one who was meant to die. That story, I read that play, and I read it translated by Ted Hughes, the poet Ted Hughes, who I liked, but who obviously, you know, is more of a poet than a translator, like poet first, translator second. So I could tell, and I knew from the beginning that he'd be putting his own stuff into it, right? And there is sort of like kind of these Christian overtones and undertones and stuff which I thought, nah, this is good, but it's probably not Euripides, you know what I mean? The original writer, and I love Euripides. So I decided I have to read the original. Well, not the original, I read it in translation, but I read it by a translator who is a translator first, Richmond Lattimore, who is a translator I trust because I read his version of the Iliad, and that was amazing and kind of opened my mind for Greek myths and stuff like that. But actually, I preferred the Ted Hughes version. So that was just shocking for me. It all basically comes down to one scene where Heracles gets drunk, and in the Ted Hughes version, when he gets drunk, he starts kind of like messing around with the servants and like making them play games to, like, you know, reenact his labors fighting the Hydra, and he's like, okay, I'll be the Hydra and you be me. No, wait, I'll be me and you be the Hydra. You guys be the heads of the Hydra, and it's really kind of fun. And it felt like Euripides to me. And then it kind of morphs into this hallucinatory experience where like he's actually living out some of the famous Hercules things, some which are in the future that haven't happened yet. And because like loads of people are on the stage at the same time, and there's like gods and dragons and whatever, then I could tell that, well, this obviously wasn't made to be performed as a Greek drama, which only has like 3 people on the stage ever at the same time. So obviously Ted Hughes has done a lot here. But what I didn't know was that it's all Ted Hughes. Like in the Euripides version, when Heracles gets drunk, he gets drunk for like a paragraph and then he quickly sobers up, and like that's it. He doesn't play all the games with the servants, and he doesn't like gradually start to lose his mind, and I don't know, like, yeah, that scene was so pivotal, I thought, for the whole play. So now I know it was just a modern insertion. I feel kind of weird about it, and that was, yeah, a surprise. I guess I don't know how I feel about it. Number 7, favorite new author, that would be Ryoko Kui, the writer and illustrator of the Dungeon Meshi series. Surprise, surprise. It just adds to my love of this whole thing, that it's from the imagination of a woman writing in such a male-dominated subgenre, and not just fantasy, but, you know, specifically swords and sorcery, video game derived dungeon crawling fantasy, you know what I mean? She doesn't have anything else translated into English apart from the Dungeon Meshi series, but I'm looking forward to whatever she comes up with next. And this has been popular, I think, from what I see online among the young ones. This is like quite a popular series, so I imagine whatever she does next will be translated into English. Number 8, newest fictional crush. This is always an interesting question. This time it's the entire cast of Dungeon Meshi, or at least the 4 main characters. Although, like, all the characters are good, but especially the 4 main characters are just so cute. incredibly wholesome. The way they work together, the way you see their flaws and their strengths. You know, like Laios, the human, is incredibly enthusiastic. He has this childlike wonder and enthusiasm for like animals and the dungeon monsters that he really wants to eat, which is funny. Then there's Marcel, the elf, who is like kind of neurotic and this kind of anxiety personality, but also like very expressive anxiety personality, which is just a great combination. It's just made for a comedy, obviously. She's the funniest one, probably. Then there's Chilchuck, the hobbit, basically, who is like really easygoing and laid back and always seems to like be quite friendly with everybody on the surface, but like he's also quite neurotic and cynical in his own way, and he's also very strict on boundaries, whether they're like personal or professional. That's Chilchuck there. And then finally there's Senshi, the dwarf, who I showed you before, who is a chef and who is kind and tolerant and trusting, often to a fault. So the thing which makes those four like really crush-worthy material, I guess, is that they're all just trying to take care of each other, and those flaws that I mentioned are also just aspects often of how they try to take care of each other when they're expressed. And you know that when they argue, and they often argue, but you know that they will come back to each other as friends. Usually over a very questionable meal. So it's all just very wholesome. Number 9, newest favorite character. Well, I kind of just did it with Dungeon Meshi, because yeah, those 4 from Dungeon Meshi, definitely. Most of the books that I read weren't very character focused, I think it's worth saying. Like even the ones I really liked, like Truckers or Palomino Molero, I hated the characters in Who Killed Palomino Molero. They're really horrible people, but I really liked the book. Number 10, a book that made you cry, Dungeon Meshi. Like, I don't know, yeah, I'm pretty sure this was the only one I read that like various episodes made me cry, especially one about orcs. I think J.R.R. Tolkien created like a problem when he created orcs and goblins in fantasy by making kind of this really popular enemy, which is basically just like a kind of, you know, social group which is okay to kill because they're kind of barbaric. And so you don't have to worry about killing them, they're just baddies, right? And I think maybe in more modern times, a lot of different fantasy creators have dealt with that problem in different ways, and of course Ryoko Kui handles it magnificently. Number 11, book that made you happy, Dungeon Meshi. Also Weasels in the Attic. Over here you can see I've got my weasels, I read the weasels. This was nice because like, yeah, it made me happy just every time I looked at this cover, this kind of really cute but eerie weasel. On the not eerie, unnerving, I'd say, unnerving weasel. Also just the presence of weasels. They didn't appear in it as much as I hoped they would, but they do. And there's fish and other animals, just fish really. But reading about animals, I guess, in literature just does make me happy. That's by Hiroko Oyamada, by the way. A Shining by John Fossa also made me very happy just because the style is so good. It's so rich and dense, and even though like I didn't really like how the plot kind of went in the end, this was one where the plot wasn't the main thing. Like the style just completely took over. Like, I don't know, it's one of these ones where like there's no like is there no paragraphs? I think there's no paragraphs, it's just blocks of text. As you can see, they're both quite short, but they both deliver a lot with what they're trying to do. The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald, that also made me very happy because I read it in a sort of bedtime story kind of way. Like I was reading the chapters usually at night before I went to bed, and it was just perfect material for that kind of bedtime story feeling, which is very nostalgic. I haven't had that from a book in ages. You know, every chapter felt kind of contained, and like I could just put it aside and look forward to the next one. But at the same time, not loads of things happen in each chapter, so it's exciting, but not like too exciting. It's also more like kind of world immersing than exciting, I would say. And Truckers, of course, made me happy because it's about gnomes escaping a department store on a truck, which is happy inducing in itself, but it's also just really positive and optimistic about organizing people to make progress and societies having the potential to, you know, bring people together despite their differences. And that's just, I guess, a kind of rare and nice, happy feeling. So thank you, Truckers. Number 12, most beautiful book you've bought so far this year. So actually, I rarely buy books, but I have bought some books this year. So I can actually answer this question by comparing them, I suppose. So these are the books I have bought this year, although this first one, Wheels in the Attic, is I technically bought it last year as a self-Christmas present, and then it only arrived this year, and then there was a whole thing where I ended up getting another copy, and this is the second copy, and I made a whole video about that fiasco. This is easily my favorite cover, I guess, of these books. But if we don't count that one and we look at the other ones that I've gotten this year, there's these two from Seattle, small independent press in Seattle. There's Beyond by Horacio Quiroga, which is like this green spiral, looks like in the back of a man's head, or kind of something going on there with a green spiral anyways, which I quite like. Then there's Anecdotes by Heinrich von Kleist, which I actually really like this one. At first I didn't think so, because it's just a guy in a forest, but now, and it's like kind of, it's a painting I think, but sort of one of those quite realistic looking paintings. But oh, there's a little bird on a stump as well. I didn't notice that. See, I like things that look, you know, they're deceptively simple, right? And I like the way that it kind of looks just like a black cover in a way, but the trees give it texture, and there's like, yeah, and I like the reds contrasting all that. So I like this more than I thought I did when I first bought it. And then recently in Vancouver, in McLeod's, in this magical bookshop, which is all like just stacks of it's more like a warehouse in a way, but it's a bookshop of secondhand books. And I got more Heinrich von Kleist because I go gaga for Heinrich von Kleist. There's this one, Amphitryon, which is a woman, the mother of Hercules, in the helmet of a general, like a Greek army general, and I really like this one. It's just, I don't know, very simple, 1960s. And then there is Prince Friedrich of Hamburg by Heinrich von Kleist, a new translation for the American stage, with this cover of two people on horses brandishing their swords at each other, and I think that's an awful cover. I really hate that. But yeah, maybe apart from the weasels, then this Amphitryon would have to win. This is also a Greek myth retelling, so very excited to read that one. And then the last one is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And the answer is more Dungeon Meshi. Now the anime has stopped after one season, and the second season hasn't come out yet. So once I go past the halfway point of the manga series, I won't know what's going to happen, so that's going to be exciting, and I'd like to go all the way to the end before the second season comes out. And then also related to kind of screen things is the fact that there's a new Alien movie coming out very soon, but I'm thinking of not watching it because I'm thinking of going to Japan later in the year, and things often, like, there's a delay, so things that come out in the West come out half a year later in Japan, and so I'm thinking of reading Nostromo by Joseph Conrad maybe in that half-a-year gap, and then going to the cinema in Japan. I should explain. Nostromo is the name of the spaceship in the original Alien movie, and I'm a huge fan of the Alien franchise. So I'm like, I don't know, kind of to mark the new addition to the Alien franchise, I kind of want to read Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. It's, I don't know, it makes perfect sense in my head. This has also got a really nice cover, hasn't it? Anyway, that's been my video. Hope you enjoyed watching. Let me know what you've been reading down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye!